All right, welcome back to the Defying Gravity podcast with Zach Goodman. It's been a while since I've posted, huh? I just had on guest Michael Fahey just a couple weeks ago, I think 3 or 4 weeks ago. It's been a bit since I posted, just kind of taking a break from the podcast. Not really a break, just I haven't necessarily made the time. We had vacation. I went on vacation for a week. So just kind of getting back in the groove of things just this past week, training wise and things like that. So again, podcasts, I enjoy doing these things, but definitely not my main focus. Definitely not something that maybe I carve enough time out for. Um, but I'm back. I was actually listening to Joe DeFranco on his industrial strength podcast. Shout out to Joe DeFranco, an OG in the game. I was listening to some of his podcasts today and really over the last few weeks, and I was listening to Joe DeFranco, and so he was kind of talking a bit about his podcast and some of his stuff, and I was like, oh, let's kind of get me up and going, and kind of get me back to the podcast. There's some different topics I've been meaning to talk about, specifically with like fall sports season coming up. The big one that I want to tackle today is in season versus off season training. So this is something I get a lot of questions and things on, like what are the differences between training an athlete that's in an in season versus training an athlete in off season, and how do you kind of approach that? I know there's a lot of information out there right now regarding like should athletes be lifting? Is this being like their highest workloads of the year? What should we be doing with them? How do we prep them? Philosophy wise, like are we preparing them for games or preparing them for their practice volumes? I don't know, shit like that. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Um, and so I'm going to kind of take you through my process and truthfully why you should just be trying to keep it simple. It's not as difficult as people make it out to seem. And we're going to kind of talk about that. Um, so first thing I want to talk about was I wanted to recap what a normal session looks like. Okay. I made an episode a while back called like setting up or making a conjugate program for an athlete. It's on the podcast somewhere, where I kind of like outline how I would set it up training wise, like what types of things, how I order exercises, how I kind of set all that programming and things up. I probably should do like a second episode or like a follow up to kind of, more in depth. I really like talking about like programming things like that more in depth. But it's important to kind of give context and have prior episodes that kind of like let people know, okay, here's where we're started. So for people that do kind of go down a rabbit hole of like my content, if they're able to kind of click on an episode and listen, they can kind of go back and look at various episodes. So, firstly, recap what a normal session looks like for me. Kind of going back, like I said, our setup is always the same, right? We're doing dynamic effort, brief maximal tension, and repetition effort every single day. Okay. So again, if you reference back to the episode, it's dynamic effort's always first with like weighted jumps and things like that. Um, that's always going to be like our first thing that we start with. After that, we're going to kind of start from high velocity to low velocities. So things like weighted jumps, plyometrics, sprinting, all that stuff's usually first, and then we're going to track all those things. Laser the sprints, measure the jumps, things like that. Okay. And then we're going to move on to our brief maximal tensions, like our strength work. And then after the strength work, we're going to move into more of our repeated effort method exercise, which we're kind of building muscle mass and, soft tissue restoration methods kind of go in there. GPP and fitness kind of goes in there. So we kind of have this like levels of training, I guess you can say. You can kind of block off the training in a session about, kind of what you're getting. So that's kind of what a normal session would look like, right? If an athlete came into me to train and they came in and they were not a normal off season, their training would look really just like that, right? They would get something fast, they'd get something slow, and they'd get something, for hypertrophy, for restoration purposes, for general fitness. Okay, so again, pretty typical kind of training session for us. And yeah, we do that 4 days a week, right? So like I'm not having like a speed day, max day, we're getting all these methods every session. So they're gonna get something heavy, they're gonna get something fast, they're gonna get something for reps in every single session. Okay. So again, I don't kind of wave like training sessions like that to where like they get a light day and a heavy day. Um, we're kind of hitting all this, velocity parameters every session. So that's what a normal session would look like, right? So rough estimate again. If you want more information on that, I have like I have previous podcasts, kind of talking about that. Um, so like second thing that kind of a follow up question that people have that I think is going to kind of add some good information to this is what is my setup for seeing athletes, right? This is like a good question to kind of understand, like, okay, am I seeing them every day? What days do I see them? Okay. Um, Athletes that I see, so during a general like school day, if I have them in my strength classes, I'll see them 4 days a week, right? And so obviously, like the school schedule, it's not always like, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, right? Like I might have an athlete, Monday, Tuesday, and then not see them again until Thursday, Friday, or I might have them Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday. Again, I get them 4 days a week. Okay. So we're always going to kind of follow an upper lower split with that. Okay. On a traditional week, it's 4 days a week, right? If they are in season and they're in my strength class, they train 4 days a week, right? I don't just have them train like once or twice in a week. Okay. That is going to be the ideal preference. Okay. The ideal preference is that athletes are still going to train 4 days a week. Okay. And this is something important. And we're going to kind of explore a bit further. Okay. If I don't have them in like a more of a traditional sense where they have to come to my class every day, say I just get them after school, I may only see them Mondays and Tuesdays, or I may only see them, 2 days a week, Thursday, Friday, or Monday and Friday, right? So I may only see them twice a week. Okay. In a perfect world, I see them 4 days a week all year round. Okay. We know that high school strength conditioning is not perfect. I'm sure if you're a private strength coach, it's not perfect, right? You're working around high school schedules, you're working on all these different schedules. Okay. There's really not a perfect schedule out there. Okay. So we kind of work with what we have. Um, so that's kind of my setup as far as seeing athletes, right? I kind of get them 4 days a week, ideally. Obviously, they miss school or they miss a session. Obviously, kind of hurts a bit, but ideal, perfect world, 4 days a week. Okay. The bare minimum that I need to see an athlete, if they're not going to see me 4 days a week, I need to see them two. Okay. Obviously, three is better than two, four is best, two. If I see them one session a week, like, yeah, that's great. But we're really not going to move the needle very much just one session. There's just only so much, training economy wise. They only have so much energy stores in one single session. You'd have to cram them with a lot of training. It would end up just being a combo day, and truthfully, it wouldn't be the best kind of scenario like that. So again, if they can only get you one a week, that's fine. But ideally, more than that. So that's kind of my setup as far as seeing athletes go, right? About 4 days a week. Okay. So kind of looking at like what's realistic, right? Obviously, if I have them and and I see them 4 days a week, okay, we're going to tweak some things in their training if they're in season, but we're not going to overhaul the training. And this is a very important thing. Okay. The reason that many coaches don't see a ton of progress in season is because they overhaul their training too much. Okay. And so follow me with this. If you take a training system, right, and it works really well and you make all these great strength and power and speed gains, right, and then you overhaul it in the in season and you either, take strength workout. I see this quite a bit where they, conjugate coach will take max work out of their week. And so they'll just do dynamic effort all the way through, or maybe they'll take speed workout and just do max effort, or take rep workout. Okay. If you take out one of those methods, then you are losing a third of like the development of that athlete, right? These methods, train different velocity and train different, special abilities, okay, and different special strengths. If you're taking out methods, I think that's a bad approach. And that's not really conjugate, right? Conjugate is this idea of we're going to get all these different stimuluses throughout a year. We're just going to kind of adjust workload. And that's kind of the way that I view training is I'm not going to pull things out. I'm going to pull back on what we're already doing. Okay. And so realistically, how much progress could you see in season? Something that I found is really interesting. It depends, right? So it depends, but here's the truth. Okay. If you have an athlete that is consistent 4 days a week, or, I say they average 3 or 4 days a week training with you, but they're consistent all off season, right? And they hit the in season, you can still expect about like a traditional maybe 5 pounds a month to the bench, maybe 10 pounds. It just depends on what sport they're in, right? If they're in like something like football where they're kind of getting beat up a lot, depending on what position they're in, you can still expect progress. It may be slowed. Okay. Or if they're in like a high endurance sport, you may, see some slight progress. Okay. But I've had athletes that have been consistent with training that have put on, 30, 40, 50 pounds in their squats in just like a month and a half, right? Or they add, 100 pounds to their lift in a season, right? You can have really rapid progress. You still have to remember these are high school kids. They're still growing and developing even in season. No matter in season, off season, their body is still physically developing. They may hit a growth spurt in season. They may, just be developing, kind of hit that next level of maturity, kind of in season. So you can see these really fast, progressions while they're in season. Obviously, off season is ideal. There's just less stress, so they less stress kind of in their schedule, so they can obviously train quite a bit harder and more frequently. But I think that this misconception that you're not going to see progress, you're going to maintain is really, really bad. Okay. Truthfully, for average athletes, the in season is kind of where you make up ground. Okay. Generally, more gifted athletes and talented athletes, just from what I've seen, are super concerned about being sore or being beat up for like games and practices and things like that. They have something to prove, right? These talented athletes, they don't want their training to take away from the game. So their approach is, well, I'll just back off. I just won't train, or I'll just miss training completely, right? And they actually detrain themselves. If you're an average athlete or a good athlete, but you're not elite, right? And you know if you're elite or not, okay? Or if you have athletes who are, average or good or whatever, right? I mean, unless you have a bunch of D1 kids walk around your building, I mean, if you have that, you can kind of get away with whatever you want. But for your average to good athletes, they need the in season, they need consistent training in season to kind of jump that next tier, right? So if you have an elite athlete, a really, really elastic kid, really athletic kid that doesn't train in season, that good athlete can, kind of bridge that gap just in 3 months, right? Because they're still getting consistent training, they're still getting consistent stimulus that other athlete is not getting. Okay. So truthfully, if you are an average athlete, you cannot afford to not train in season. Okay. And that is a stance, that is a hill I'll die on. If you are not even if you are an elite athlete, you really shouldn't. But let's be realistic. If you're an elite athlete, you can get away with a lot of things. If you're a good athlete or an average athlete, you can't get away with a lot of things. Okay. And that's just the truth. You have to train in season. It's like a crucial, crucial time. It's really the time that you kind of can jump other people. Okay. So again, you can expect to gain in season if your training's correct, and that's kind of what we're going to talk about today: is how do we gain in season? Okay, I'm not into the maintenance shit. I don't like that. I don't really believe in like maintaining abilities. You're either getting better, or you're getting worse. Okay. Obviously, there's a threshold there of like maintenance, but we don't really know, right? You see these charts come out of like, I'm going to talk about this too, probably in the future, but like, oh, strength max strength diminishes in plus or minus 30 days, and speed diminishes in complete bullshit, right? The truth of the matter is that strength and speed both diminish relatively quick. Neural coordination develops relatively quick, right? So to tell you the truth, like if you think that you can get away with not heavy strength training, or you think you can get away with like just really really infrequent training, like you're mistaken, right? To tell you the truth, you're really mistaken. You lose those abilities so much faster. And for coaches that test people all year, they test athletes all year, you can see it happen relatively quick. Okay. So what do we need to do to keep progress in season? Okay. Um, so progress in season. Okay. What do we need to keep or progress? Most important thing that you're going to be doing in season is keep intensity. Okay. When we look at intensity, volume, and frequency, it's going to be ideal to keep frequency and intensity, okay, with pulling back volume. But if you pull back intent or frequency, then you're not going to pull back volume, right? So intensity is going to be steady, okay. Volume, frequency is the things you're going to play with. So if you have an athlete that sees you twice a week, you're going to pull back. Obviously, frequency is naturally going to be pulled back. So volume you can keep relatively steady. If you have an athlete you see 4 days a week in season, you're going to pull back their volume a bit. Okay, not drastic. I'm not talking about cutting a session completely in half or slashing things, right? I'm not talking about training like that. I'm talking about just slight pullback. Okay. Um, so intensity, okay, that is kind of the foundation of all athletic performance training. You have to have intensity. You have to have, lift heavy weights. You have to jump, maximally. You have to sprint maximally. Those things should be steady all year. Okay, but you're just adjusting the workloads here, right? We're not adjusting the stimulus. We're adjusting the workloads. Okay. So kind of, thinking about, what do we need to pull back? So the first thing I want to talk about, frequency is kind of off the table, right? Like as a coach, you don't really have a lot of control over frequency. I kind of want to put that out there. Like I don't, right? I'm in the same situation as many of you. Is I don't have a lot of say over how often I see a kid, right? They may not show up to school. They may just not show up to workouts. They may be playing a game out of state. I don't even know, right? So that's something important to think about. Is like you don't have a lot of say over frequency, so you do have a lot of say over intensity and volume, though. Okay. So strategies to kind of lessen volume inside of an athlete's in season. Okay. First kind of strategy that I would say here, um, and this is a big one that I've really implemented a lot, especially with my 4 day a week athletes. Okay, is half the sets. Okay, half the sets. So what you do is if you do, say for brief max potential, say you do 4 sets of 5, right? you have an athlete that's in season, okay, and it's game day, right? You may just slash those sets in half. You may just give them 2 sets of 5, right? Or maybe it's the day before a game and you want to pull back a bit, okay? You'd slash those sets in half. You keep the reps the same, whatever reps that you're kind of rotating. Maybe it's fives, maybe it's fours, doubles. I don't know where you're at in your training. I'm always the first. I'm going to slash sets. I'm not going to slash reps. Okay. Doesn't mean you can't, but that would be the first thing that I would do. Is I would slash sets first. Okay. Especially if you have an underdeveloped athlete. Here's the thing. If you have an athlete that is average to good, right, and like they're a performer on their team, they are, they need to perform, or they need to perform well, but like part of their edge is the training, right? Like they're not a naturally gifted athlete. They can just skip it and be fine. Like their edge is the training. Those athletes, you'd want to slash sets. Okay? You'd still want to keep all the stimulus in there, but just slash the amount of work. Um, for an athlete who is, in my opinion, someone who's underdeveloped, right? So like a freshman, sophomore, someone that's playing a sub varsity level, maybe someone that's not even a huge contributor to their team, someone that's severely lacking physically. I would just keep it all the same to tell you the truth, because the thing that they need to bridge that gap of performance is going to be the training, right? So if even athletes are severely underdeveloped, I really wouldn't slash anything. I would just give them the same stimulus, because the truth of the matter is their freshman freaking soccer game, freshman football game doesn't matter that much, right? Their performance on the JV level, their JV, football game, their performance doesn't matter that much, right? We care a lot about when they get to varsity. Freshman and JV is just like the feeder programs, right? That's how we get athletes ready. It's how we kind of teach them what to do, the expectations, we develop them, right? Varsity is really the big show, right? So freshmen, JV kids, I really wouldn't change very much. I just don't think it's necessary. That's just to tell you the truth. Long term, we're looking at a 4-year development of an athlete. Wouldn't we want to give that athlete every possible opportunity to be the best they can be in 4 years, or give them the best opportunity they can be Thursday night, right? If you ask me, the most important thing is to give them the best chance they have to hit their peak of athletic development in high school, and that's not going to happen on a Thursday night, right? Where you're cutting your workouts so you can perform best at your freshman football game. Okay. It's going to be planned, consistent work over the long haul. Okay. So those young kids, probably not slashing them. If you have a kid that's getting a lot of workload now, or a little beat up, or they're a key contributor on their, varsity team, whatever, slash their sets, keep the reps the same. Okay. Other thing I would do, from an intensity standpoint, especially if they're beat up, or you have an athlete that you can clearly tell, like, mentally they're just not really ready to train on a game day. Like if I have a kid on a game day, you can tell that they're, maybe in the back of their mind, like, oh, should I train? Should I not train? That kind of thing. What I really like to do is I like to pivot with dynamic effort work. Okay. And many of you, if you listen to my podcast, I don't really do a lot of like speed barbell lifts. But speed barbell lifts are extremely good for pivoting. Something that like Dave Hoff has talked about, Michael Fahey has, kind of shared this wisdom with me. I think we talked about it on the podcast, but like the most important reason that, geared lifters and lifters at Westside use dynamic effort isn't just for the rate of force development. It's really not even about rate of force development. It has more to do with not killing themselves max effort, right? Having that kind of natural, you know, how should I say, not really down regulation, but kind of that natural pendulum swing back down in intensity, so then they can gear back up for their next max effort day. So dynamic effort makes for a very great pivot strategy. Okay. So like speed squats, speed pulls, speed benches, great for pivoting. Okay. So what I would do is personally, I would cut their sets in half and I would give them speed, more like a speed range type of dynamic effort lift. So say an athlete was doing 225 for fives on their bench press. Maybe I give them 185 for, fives. Okay. Something just 40 pounds less, right? But I'm going to say, hey, let's move fast. So maybe, they're working in that 90 some percent range, 85% range. We're pulling back to 60, right? They're still going to get a stimulus. They're still going to develop coordination. They're still going to, repeat movement patterns, but we're not going to crush them. And mentally, they're going to feel really good because they're going to basically just get a little bit of a pump and feel pretty solid. Okay. And that works like a charm. So if you have on the fly, you need an athlete to, you need to pull back on intensity or pull back, volume, cut the sets, pivot to dynamic effort work. That's a really big strategy. It's super simple. Most people way overthink this. It is literally as simple as just dropping their weight just a bit on what they're already using and just run it. It's really that simple. It's not something that you need to, like, exercise scientists to tell you. It's really simple. And I've used it with a lot of success. And I've I've only had great success with game day lifts with my kids. Like I have kids that will swear by game day lifts. They'll swear by training. Um, I've never had a kid that, oh, I felt really run down from our lift. Never really had that. Um, so that's like the least important thing you're worried about as part of their game day lifts. There's so many other factors, but if you do this thing right, like you're never going to have complaints. If anything, kids are going to feel mentally really, really good. Um, kind of about that. Other things. So kind of back to the overhauling thing, right? If your system is good, if your training system is good, you don't have to overhaul in season, right? So if you have a really, if your system is potent, if it develops athletes really well, you shouldn't have to change a bunch of things. You shouldn't have to, change exercises and change rep scheme and change all these things because your program works. And to tell you the truth, in high school, we're developmental, right? Like we're trying to develop athletes. We're at this, weird part of their life where they're old enough to be, to do really cool things athletically, but they're still like really immature as far as training years go. And so I hate sacrificing like training years. So like I'm not big on like, overhauling the system and things like that in season. Other thing, kind of a bone I have to pick with like other strategies that are popularly used, like specifically with like partials, using partials in season. So like for example, maybe you squat full range of motion in season, and then you go to a high box, right? Or maybe you squat to a 12-inch box and off season. In season, you go to a high box, right? You go to a 20-inch box or 24-inch box. This is something that I see a lot of coaches do where they're like, oh, we'll do partials all in season, which partials are great and you can use them sparingly. But to overhaul your whole training system and get rid of full range of motion strength training to save for soreness and things like that is stupid. Okay. Um, Firstly, it's stupid from the standpoint of not understanding what makes athletes sore, what's actually causes muscular damage. It's really just kind of uneducated in the fact of like where are we at developmentally in these athletes' lives? Like, are they 14-year-old kids or are they 25-year-olds trying to do well at the NFL Combine, right? Like, where are we at like developmentally? Um, so like I think it's a really this kind of bad take on training, like cutting out all the full range of motion stuff, like doing board presses all in season instead of doing any 4 range of motion pressing, like getting rid of the meat and potatoes of your program just so you can, you know, help athletes feel better in the short term. Because here's what's going to happen is you're going to change. You're going to go from doing a 4 range of motion lift, maybe it's a 4 range of motion press or a 4 range of motion squat. You're going to get rid of those things and they're going to feel amazing, right? Because performance is simply just, subtracting fatigue, from fitness, right? If you basically performance is equal to fitness minus fatigue, right? We take, fatigue off, how fit you are is how you're going to perform. Okay. And so you have to understand that you're going to take a lot of fatigue off them right off rip, right? So maybe if they go a week or 2 or 3 weeks, right? They feel great. No, don't feel beat up, feel really strong and powerful and amazing. And then week 4 comes around and they start feeling beat up. They start feeling weaker. They start running slower, jumping, they're less explosive, right? Because their fitness is also deteriorating, right? Their fitness is deteriorating, which is going to do 2 things. Firstly, it's going to make you not as prepared for the task at hand. Secondly, it's going to allow you to be more susceptible to fatigue, right? The higher level of fitness you have, the less susceptible you are for fatigue. So you're going to basically get crushed on both ends of this performance kind of equation, right? You're going to get crushed in fitness, you're going to get crushed in fatigue. Okay. So I think that that's a bad kind of training practice people do is like partials or like limited range of motion training, or they change their exercises, right? They go from doing, you know, doing back squats to doing again high box squats, or they go from doing regular deadlifts to trap bar, high bar, or high handle trap bar deadlifts, right? They start limiting range of motion. Um, Again, I don't think that's a good strategy for most athletes. I really think you should stick with your meat and potatoes all year, right? So for me, like I'll just share with you right now. So we just got through a box squatting phase, right? We box squatted the last couple months. Hit some great PRs, ready for so all the metrics we use to kind of measure like how effective we're being in training. Everything's going great, right? Um, and I'll talk more about we're going to a free squat right now. We're going to heel elevated free back squats. Okay. And we're planning on going heel elevated back squats for the next, probably a couple months. Okay. Part of that is, you know, truthfully, the most important part of that is that we've been box squatting for the last couple months and we need to change. We need to overcome accommodation in some way past just adding more weight. And so kind of cycling in some free squatting is really beneficial for kind of, in my opinion, building structure. and building, eccentric strength and building, coordination, especially out of the hole. But in general, it's changing the mode, right? You're changing you're overcoming accommodation through change and variety. So that's an important thing to do. But also, my athletes get a lot more out of the box squat and they know how to free squat. I'm going to get a lot of new athletes in the next month because school's going to start. I'm going to get a bunch of freshmen that I haven't seen all summer coming in to train. So we're going to start them with a lift that's going to carry over to the ultimate goal, which is to get them to box squat proficiently. And so heel elevated back squats, if they know how to back squat, in a sound manner, they're going to know they're going to get more out of the box squat because they're due to box squat more like a pause squat rather than sitting back and like hinging box squats. So that's something I've learned over the last, couple of years is like, if you know how to free squat proficiently, you'll get more out of the box squat. And that's really the reason why. Okay. But if you look at their in-season training, right, we're not getting rid of, full range of motion strength training. We're still going to squat through, deep range of motion, still going to press, right? We're pause benching this next phase. We're still going to deadlift. We're still going to do RDLs. We're still going to do, all of our lunging variations and all the things that we like to do that I really push all year. We're still going to do that stuff. We're just going to mess with the dose. Okay. So don't get caught up in trying to change the whole program or to mess with all your exercises. If anything, keep your exercise selection really the same, because something that people don't talk about enough is that exercises, when you change them, it actually causes, we overcome accommodation, right? Which means a new stress, a new stimulus to the body. You're training, maybe it's the same tissue, but in a different pressure gradient. And so what that's going to do is it's going to cause muscle soreness. Okay. So if you've ever not squatted for a while, or you've, done box squats for a long time, you went back to free squats, or you went from a wide stance to a close stance, right? You're still training this pattern. You're still training the same tissue. You're just training a different pressure, right? That's going to cause a lot of, muscular, DOMs or, delayed onset muscle soreness, things like that, and muscular damage. So the worst thing that a lot of coaches do is they start changing exercises while they're in season. It actually causes more soreness, right? It actually causes the athletes to be more sore because it's a new environment, right? You're changing the environment, you're changing the exercise. Okay, you're not changing the reps or the sets or the weights. You're changing the actual environment of the exercise, which is also going to change all those other components just kind of inherently. Okay. So that's something that I see, people mess up with a lot. Another strategy that I really like and I've had good success with is, truthfully, during the in season, if you're worried about performance and fatigue and things like that, shifting to low stress type movements. Okay. And so it kind of goes back. My point just was is that you shouldn't change all your movements, but listen to this. Okay. A movement I really like to do, and I've had this conversation with a lot of coaches, and a movement that a lot of people are love and are high on, and that I love, but for a different reason, is the front squat. Okay. Many coaches use the front squat for their main movement all year, right? Front squat is their big thing. It's their kind of their KPI. It's their big strength, lower body movement, right? I don't like that. I don't like the front squat. It's not enough load, right? It's not an extreme enough load to create enough extreme change in the nervous system. But in season, you can use the front squat. Okay. You can still load it. You can still keep intensity high relative to the actual lift, but you can train really heavy, but you're training in front squat. So inherently it's going to be lighter. Okay. Variation in training, in part, that's one of the biggest keys, is that it actually changes the pressure gradients, but it also changes the velocities and the intensities that are placed in the body, right? So for example, if I wanted to load up, if I want to put the most amount of load on an athlete, I'm going to have them box squat or back squat, right? Those are going to be the two, squat movements that are going to be the biggest, biggest kind of change the nerves and the most intense, the highest load, right? If I'm looking at trying to keep an athlete stronger, make them stronger, okay, but I'm trying to take off some of that, maybe spine or, stress off the spine, you want to decompress them or something like that in that fashion, then a front squat works really, really well. So like maybe shifting into a front squat for like a month or two works good. You can still squat heavy. It's just going to be light because inherently a front squat is just lighter than a back squat. Okay. It has a more of a technical component, the more neural coordination, more instability. Okay. That doesn't mean to overhaul your training to Bosu balls. Okay. It doesn't mean to overhaul the training to something. It's just slight changes that are lower stress options. Okay. Um, some coaches like maybe, for me, I wouldn't do this just because I don't see a lot of fatigue in the upper body. But if you're worried about like an upper body lift, you could shift from a barbell bench press flat bench to a potentially a incline press, right? or you maybe wanted to change to a Spoto, which is always going to be lighter than your normal bench, right? Or you want to change to some other variation where it's just a slight variation, but inherently it makes the lift harder, adds a variable to the lift that makes it more challenging. So the loads are automatically less, right? Effort wise, they can still put a lot of effort in, but they're just never going to be able to use the same amount of load just because there's other components at play. Okay, so that's another strategy that you might want to use in season. Again, evaluate your program, figure out what kind of fits and what doesn't for you. Okay, but that's something that I've messed around with as well. Other in season things. Okay, on accessory work, this is another thing that I wanted to talk about. That I think's important. Accessory work wise, do not program accessory work that you know is high stress and or gonna cause muscular soreness, right? It's potentially, probably more lengthens, but kind of training muscle at different longer lengths. But things like a lunge, right? You may not want to program a lot of lunging in an in-season athlete's program, right? You may not want to program lunges after they squat or after this. You may want to pull back on some of those accessories that maybe are a little bit harder to recover from, some of the higher stress accessories, right? Just to kind of keep them a little bit fresher. That's something you could pull back on, right? Doesn't mean to not train unilaterally. Doesn't mean to not squat anymore. Doesn't mean any of that. You just may opt for a lift that you know isn't going to make them sore, right? Or like for the hamstrings, maybe you opt out of RDLs and maybe you give them, some sort of hamstring curl or something that's just not going to beat them up as much, or banded hamstring band work. Band work is a freaking cheat code in season. Okay. Or on game days, I have athletes lift on game days. I love bands. Bands do not beat you up. Okay. They don't beat you up. You can get volume in. It's restorative in nature. Okay. Bands are awesome. Okay. So like banded rows, banded push downs, banded face pulls. So many different things you can do with bands. Okay. I really like that stuff as well. Okay. But again, these are all the strategies that I'm just kind of giving out that, like, if you find just one that could help or one that you could add to your program, that would be awesome. Again, every podcast that I talk about, there's going to be things you're going to take away from me and things you don't, or things you hate, or things that you love. That's just part of it, right? But if you could take one thing away, that would be awesome, right? If you could take one of these strategies or one of these things in season, that would be great, to kind of add to your own program. But at the end of the day, again, that's kind of the way that I kind of approach our in-season athletes. It's very simple, it's very straightforward, and at the end of the day, it's not much changes. And that's like the biggest point I want to drive home before we're off here is, like, you don't have to change much, right? Lean into what your program is, lean into the stuff that you know works, and just adjust the workload over the course of a season, right? Do not overhaul the training, please, for the love of God, do not overhaul the training, right? Don't change everything. Keep what works, adjust volumes, adjust workloads, and you are going to be just fine. Your athletes will make crazy progress. I've seen actually some athletes make better progress in season than off season. Sounds weird, but they have. I've seen athletes respond better from, one or two top sets versus 4 or 3 top sets. You'll see some crazy stuff in season if you just keep the pedal on the metal and you just adjust the workload, right? Keep the intensity high, keep the frequency as frequent as possible. If they can see you 4 days, perfect. They can only see you 2, fine, right? But don't overhaul the whole training. Okay. Other thing, last thing for I'm off here, combo lifts. Okay. Don't want to leave you guys without that. Use combo lifts as your friend in season, especially in season. If you only see an athlete twice a week, unless it's a back-to-back kind of thing, I wouldn't combo lift. Say you see them Monday and Tuesday, I would just do an upper lower. But if I see them like Monday, Wednesday, or like, Monday, Thursday, or whatever, I would combo lift both of those days, right? So they're still getting the frequency of, a, a press, a squat, a pull, things like that. Are still getting that twice a week. I would combo lift them both those days. Okay. Use combo lifts. I'll have a podcast where I just go over how to program combo lifts, but combo lifts are your friend in season. Okay. But that is all I have to share with you guys tonight. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. I'm going to kind of try to get back into doing some more things. I do have a list of guests that I'm still working on getting them, on here and kind of figuring out schedule wise how that will work. Okay. But I do have a banger of, just really, really good people to have honest. Again, I'm going to have, in my opinion, I'm going to have probably one of the best lineups in a podcast around. Okay. I'm not a big podcast. I don't have a huge following, but I have a list of people that have agreed or are interested in doing it that are leaders in the field or people you can't even get on other podcasts that are going to come on here and chat with me. And I feel like I do a relatively good job with asking the right questions. So hopefully you find some value in those kind of next guests podcast. I'm not going to spoil who I'm having on next, but the plan is the person I plan to have on is someone who doesn't go on a lot of podcasts, declines a lot of podcasts, very well known, and an expert in his own right, in his own kind of area, right? So that is all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for listening. Peace.